And it looks like we are recording. So hello and welcome to our SIG CLI bi-weekly meeting on November 16th. I'm Sean Sullivan, I'm your host. Why don't we jump into the announcements. First, is the agenda visible to everybody?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Okay, great. So the first thing I'd like to announce is our release dates. We just had the code freeze just a little bit less than a week ago, and that 126 release is scheduled for Tuesday, December 6th. I just want to bring up the idea that the release 127 enhancement freeze is also coming up. I think we have some very aggressive deadlines for some enhancements, including for prune. And so I just want to make sure that that's at the top of everybody's mind. We have the holiday season coming up, and so there's going to be quite a bit of non-work going on. So we want to keep our eye on the next date, which is the enhancements freeze. We don't know what that date is yet, but we should distribute that when we do get that data. So in addition, the next announcement has to do with some of the video recordings from KubeCon. I included a playlist of all of the video recordings of our recent North American KubeCon in Detroit. And in addition, the recording for the SIG CLI, the intro and updates presentation that we did. And if you haven't seen it yet, please do take the time to check it out. So that's all I had for announcements. Does anybody else have anything else that they would like to announce? Okay, why don't we move on to introductions then? So this is the part of our meeting where those who are new to the SIG CLI or haven't been here for a while can introduce themselves to your colleagues. I think we do have a couple of new people. This is completely voluntary, so if you don't want to do that, that's fine as well. Would anybody like to introduce themselves? Okay, I think we can move directly on to the topics then. I think the first topic we have Katrina talking about the effective test coverage for kube control copy.
Prasad, did you just raise your hand to do an intro?
Oh.
I saw your hand go up.
I'm sorry. I did.
Yeah, hi, I guess I'll go ahead. I'm Prasad. I work in VMware. I've been involved in the structured logging working group, and this is my first, this is my first time I've been in the SIG CLI. I have a specific topic that I wanted to discuss with. So it's nice to meet you guys.
Welcome, and my apologies for blowing past your introduction there. I didn't see the hand being raised, but I do see your topic on here, and it's a pleasure to meet you. Thanks for joining us. Is there anyone else who would like to introduce themselves? I'll check to see if anybody's raising their hand. Okay, great. So I guess we can now move on to the topic.
All right, yeah, so this is just a question for the group based on a PR that I was tagged on for review. This is a to-do that several people have tried to fix over the years, made a PR for, and neither the current PR nor those have been accompanied by test coverage for the change in question. So I was asking for it, obviously. We have our reliability initiative where we're requiring not only test coverage of the feature in question, but test coverage foundations for the entire area that contribution is being made to. So it seemed very important and natural to ask for that. But then the contributor reasonably asked for guidance on how to go about it because this command is under tested in general. And looking into it, it seems like the reviewer on the original kubectl CP PR way back when asked for the same coverage that I'm asking for. And the answer was basically it's impossible because our CI doesn't actually run the containers. So you can't possibly test things that depend on responses effectively from the container runtime when it comes down to it. And that seems to be true today as far as I can tell. So I guess first question, does anyone know of that not being true or a way that we have to test features that depend on containers? And then the second question is, if that's not true, how the heck do we go about making improvements to these areas that actually can't be tested? Like even when you can see there's like a big back and forth between me and the contributor because me and the contributor are using different container runtimes in our local environments. And the feature that they're adding works for them and it doesn't work for me. So there's also that complexity there that like it actually depends on the container runtime. And I think the protocol that gets selected automatically in negotiation also changes something just from digging around the code in this case about the error handling. So there's like a bunch of different permutations here as to whether or not the change would actually be effective, and we can't test it. So I'm just kind of thinking, I don't know what to do with this situation, and I wanted to hear the thoughts of the group.
With regard to testing, I'm a little bit surprised because in E2Es, we are running containers normally, and we should be getting the appropriate information no matter what you're doing. So maybe the author was looking either at the unit tests, which yes, they don't run containers, or they were looking into integration, which again, they don't run containers because integration usually starts the API server controller managers. They don't run kubelets. But E2Es are executed against a full-blown Kubernetes cluster. So you should get whatever you need from there. That's the first thing. A general guideline for the cases like that, if the error is not explicitly clear and there are different variances between container runtime implementation, I would probably prefer not to have this kind of error message rather than having a wrong one or particularly dependent on the container runtime. Additionally, maybe adding some warning at the top or something like that, or enrich the current error with, have you checked if your container has a tar, which is required because the copy failed.
Yeah, for that last part, the what they're trying to do is enrich the error, but the problem is that some container runtimes we're getting back a structured status where we can actually see the exit code as an exit code, and in other cases we're just getting back a string that does happen to mention the exit code in there, but it's not structured, so we'd have to be string scanning. And our original thought on the PR was like, well, we don't want to string scan, we want to look at the exit code, but turns out that's not always available. So then do we actually want to string scan because it's more flexible, but then that's kind of sketchy. So that's kind of where the implementation
I was more thinking about a general remark where we would always put, are you sure that the error isn't caused by the tar? I remember that we also bolded the tar requirement in the copy. But yeah, I'd be very careful about adding those edge cases. They will be confusing to a lot of users. And eventually they will trickle to us back through issues where different users will have different error being returned to them.
Right, which is already the case today because it depends on the container runtime. So they're already seeing different errors. And it's just like the PR would change it so that some people see a better error and other people don't. And we're adding a request to everybody to potentially give a better error to some because it is doing this pre-flight check for whether tar is installed. And like for some people, like my container runtime actually is outputting an error that's pretty clear about the fact that the problem is tar not being installed, but the authors is just printing the exit code. So that's, yeah, it's inconsistent, unfortunately. Eddie, I see you have your hand up. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I was going to echo some of the same stuff. I think I wouldn't even try to mess around catching with this unless we can stub out or mock things inside of our unit tests. The integration ETE bash tests and the Ginkgo test and all that should be testing for this if we want to catch it there. I think some of those do run on pre-submit, though we'll have to check into which ones do. But the greater thing about the copy command, I've talked to the CRI folks and Phil Estes and Containerd folks and a bunch of different people at KubeCons and Micah Hassler too. Micah Hassler at this recent one, he had some ideas. But I think the biggest thing that we'd all like to see is this API should just be part of the container runtime interface to copy files from and move between a container and not. And it sounds like everyone's on board. We just need someone to step up and own it and do the work. But it didn't sound like it would take much convincing because everyone I talked to said it was a good idea.
There was also a discussion as part of the batch work group where they would want to see a much more standardized exit codes from being returned from the CRI. Because in the batch work group case, they wanted to act upon particular failures. Problem is the current failures are not standardized. So that's probably what Eddie was talking about. There are efforts to standardize that in the CRI, but it'll be some time before we get to that point where this is standardized first and then implemented across the board.
Yeah, but I'm not just talking the errors. I'm talking they are on board for adding a file copy API, which if that's the right move. If we have anyone who wants to do the work there, that's again always the problem.
So is the consensus that we do have ETE tests? I haven't actually seen much of our ETE tests so far, so I'll definitely take a look at that. I found the Kubecontrol package for that. But if the behavior is not, like if the improvement isn't going to be able to be consistently applied to all users, then we don't actually want it. There's a to-do in the code that the person is reacting to, I believe, in addition to having seen the poor error message themselves.
Maybe we should probably review all of our to-dos, and some of them are there for historical reasons and nobody just cleaned them up, which is confusing some of the people that we actually want to get it fixed, where actually we should just get rid of the to-do by itself.
Somewhat related, on like port forwarding, we have a similar problem where we get connection reset by peer returned back, and we don't get it in a way that we can parse it consistently, and so it's really container runtime dependent. And the decision there from through the discussion with Jordan was like, and some other people, was that we don't want to like have any specific code that says if you're this container runtime, then then look at it this way, or if you're this other container runtime, look at it this way. So it kind of feels like a similar problem here, where some container runtimes will return things in a way that could be reacted to. So if there's any similarity there and with port forward, that's the decision that was made there. And I opened an issue. I'll paste it in the chat here, but I opened an issue on, I guess the SIG node requesting like, hey, can we get errors back in a more structured way that we can interpret? So maybe there's a similar thing that can be done there for copy.
Right. Thanks for sharing that. That does look quite relevant.
So I had a quick question. So I know that we actually considered dropping the entire kubectl copy command because of all the security vulnerabilities. And obviously we decided to keep it. Is that documented anywhere, or?
Yes, Sally and I, when we were, so that was happening at the time when we got flushed with tons of CVEs, specifically about copy. There is an enhancement where we wrote it down. I'll try to find the link in a moment about the decisions, about the considerations. The general consensus was that copy is pretty broadly used, and we would not want to force people off of it, or eventually force people to start using a plugin to do that. But we will significantly limit the capabilities, especially those around globbing and recursiveness, because those were the ones that were causing the majority of the problems. So we decided to only allow copying single files instead, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure if the directories are supported still. This way, it's just simpler, and we can have a full control, because a lot of the CVEs were related with how we are dealing with links and all those edge cases where you can actually escape the directories when copying files from within, and if someone will be able to overtake the tar binary inside of the container.
Got it, thanks. So Katrina, did we address enough of this?
I think that's a lot of interesting information, and the ET tests are definitely good to look into. I just I'm still not totally clear on what I should say to the contributor. Should I tell them actually just remove the to do because we can't provide a consistent message, or should I tell them to look into the ET tests because we and like accept a mix of string scanning and exit code checking, or yeah, like what is the final? Does anyone feel strongly about what we do with the particular PR in light of what we just discussed?
I would probably just suggest dropping the to do, and if Eddie has some links towards standardization in the CRI interface, or there are some discussions, I can probably look up the ones that happened with regards to batch. We can point to those places and then just close, or eventually limit to only dropping the to-dos for now, because that's not something that we would be willing to fix at this point in time.
Okay, that's clear. Thanks.
I'm sorry, real quick. These exit codes, I don't think this would work on Windows, right? Let's make sure they test that on Windows.
I mean, we're gonna drop the PR, so
Okay.
But that's another good point. Like,
Okay, if we're ready to move to the next topic, then we've got Maciej, Marley, and Arda talking about our very cool kuberc work.
Okay, so Marty started working on a PR to add the APIs for kuberc. If I remember correctly, she started discussions with Eddie about the API side of things. If I remember correctly, I already had some issues and I commented on the Slack. Can't remember if I commented already on the PR itself. The only one point that I would like to see being changed with regards to the API side of things is that I would like to mimic what we are doing with regards to configuration and the Kube API server, Kube controller manager, and so forth, where we would have a separate config directory, whether that will be at the top level of kubectl or whether that will be package config. And then we would be basically reusing the entire API machinery with regard to kuberc parsing capabilities. I don't want us reinvent this mechanism because that's something that is proven stable, and we wouldn't have to deal with the conversions and all those problems that might appear. We would be just generating new types, and we would ensure that they convert properly between different versions. And one of the reasons when we were talking about it during KubeCon was that we will most likely be heavily changing the kuberc in the alpha, especially at the alpha stage. The main goal is to have something usable with minimal set of features, but out there as soon as possible. The reason for that is the sooner we ship it to users, the sooner we will be able to gather feedback and eventually start building something else. Following that, I was talking with Eddie during KubeCon, and I promised him that I'll put together a PR that actually implements the alias command. The alias command fulfills at least 50% of the requirements that we have for commands, because by having the ability to inject an alias, we can either override default flags for specific commands, or we can have your own individual commands injected. Sean, if you could open the second PR from the agenda. That is the simplest, most basic part of the implementation. Pick the second comment only. That's the only one that the first one is just moving files around for simplicity. The second comment, if you could open it up. I was actually able to build on top of the current aliasing mechanism that Cobra already provides. So adding an alias to commands is as simple as just injecting those when we are building the tree of commands. And in a similar fashion, I can inject additional flags. Fun fact, when I was trying to work with the kuberc alias command, the first thing that I was keeping in my head was the ability to set the interactive flag for delete. And it turned out that we don't have the interactive flag implemented for delete at all, even though we had a very long discussion about the interactiveness for delete. So it would be pretty cool if we could just do that bit. So yeah, hold on, Sean, a little bit up. Yes, and that's it. That's literally the implementation. Currently, the implementation is that I'm creating the alias handler, and it already has a hard-coded alias and whatever it translates. In my case, I decided to inject delete. The blah is the alias, and the argument for this one is dry run client, because that was the simplest one that I could play with. But if you change blah to delete, it will work equally well. And if you invoke kube delete a config map or whatever, it will give you that it actually runs with a dry run client. It's very simple, and we could get it shipped in 127 easily. I already pinged Arda and Marley about it. Marley would be working on the API side of things. Arda could pick up my work on this proof of concept. We would only have to wire these two together, and the aliases would be working like a charm. Like I said, the only two things that I noticed when I was playing with it was, one, aliases are actually reported in the help command. So if you do, I don't know, kubectl delete -- help, it actually gave me the blah as an alias. I'm not sure if it's something that we do want to do, because theoretically you'll get that information, but that information will be dependent on of your kubeRC. Secondly, the alias is not all, because the alias will not show the information about the flags injected. So that's something that I noticed immediately. The second thing is I didn't play with it. Maybe it's possible, but the completions will not work out of the box. I'm pretty sure that if we reach out to Mark will be able to fix it for us. But I think that would be still a good starting point to get the ball rolling. Although, if I remember correctly, through an alias, the completions will also should apply, because when I was working with that delete and playing with it, it actually worked. So there is a high chance that just because we are registering an alias for a command through a Cobra built-in mechanism, that completion should work. The thing that I did not test is specifying multiple commands, multiple arguments to a single command, or the priorities, because that's the other thing, and we will probably have to figure out what will happen if someone decides to have different aliases for the same command. But that's just because the structure that I picked is created this way, but that's probably the least of the problems that we have. Give it a go, play with it. I put it together on Monday, or yes, Monday. It was surprisingly easy to put it together. If you have any questions, ideas, suggestions, I think at this point in time we only have to go. I remember that Marley added additional user story to the kubeRC tab, so we'll have to just implement it and push it forward in 127. Yeah, go ahead, Katrina. Oh, Katrina dropped her hand. Marley?
Katrina's on mute.
Sorry. Two questions. The first one is, like, is this actually what is in the KEP currently? And the second question is, when in this example that's like showing on the screen right now, is the delete being replaced with blah? So like we're allowing built-in commands to actually be completely overwritten. Is that correct?
The way that I currently implemented it, yes. That was one of the reasons why I went and what I was talking with Eddie during KubeCon, because we were struggling with what is the basic set of features that we want to allow, and we were talking about being able to set default flags, being able to define aliases, and so forth. And then I started, and then I realized that normally in most Unix environments, if you log in as root, the root user has an alias to rm command, which is always rm-i. This way, when you're a regular user, rm is just rm and it won't ask you. But if you log in as a root admin, as a root user, it will always ask you for the confirmation. So I figure out that probably the ability to override the default commands would be the best thing that we could do. I'm not saying that people have to use it, but this way you could be protected, especially in the light of the discussion that we had for the interactive and all that. Being able, of course, it will cause problems in some fields, because when you will be moving between different environments, where on one you will have the kuberc file and on the other one you won't, and in the one where you have kuberc, you will have the default -interactive, and on the other you won't. Yes, you will run into problems and we will not save you, but maybe over time we will teach people to accept the aliases more broadly. And yes, that alias would then basically cover 50% of the use cases that are already in the cap.
So the two concerns that I would have with this approach would be the one kind of related to what you're talking about the help text, that built-in commands that are defined and well documented online in help, etc., will not behave as documented, and I feel like there might get issues open about that. I check like the git aliases don't seem to let you overwrite built-in commands, and I wonder what other tools do as well. And then second, like the flip side of that, like we can make it safer, is that somebody can also make it more dangerous. Like you could have an attack vector where somebody injects a kuberc and your git does a delete. Like that would be pretty bad. So, and it would be like kind of invisible to you, and I think very, very surprising.
I'm open to say that initial we will not allow, because there's nothing stopping us from saying, oh, initially we will not allow overriding the default commands, and we will only allow creating aliases which are not an existing command. That's a simple check in the inject all command and the inject function. So I'm open to that. I don't have any strong preferences one way or the other. I just came up with that when I was thinking about that RM alias in the Linux environment. But yeah, I'll probably leave it to Marley and Arda to figure out which way they want to go. I promised the prototype to Eddie that I'll do it this week, and I did everything to keep that promise.
Yeah, I think it's a really neat idea. And I guess that's why I was wondering if it was in the kept like that, because like if we were relying on providing the functionality through an overwrite, like the ability to default the arg through an overwrite, then saying like, well, we're not going to allow overwrite at first, that would mean like we could end up in a situation where the way that we've implemented actually doesn't accommodate the core feature of being able to do the -I, because of the way that we chose to implement it. Yeah, so that's all.
Said, we can definitely start with being a little bit more restrictive, and then change down the way, because it's easier than doing the other way around. This is something similar to what we did with plugins, where we initially said we will not allow overriding the built-in commands. We now see that there are use cases. We will open it up, but only for create subcommands, nothing else. We can do the exact same thing over here.
I guess my question is like, what does the API look, the end user facing API look like? Because if it looks like overriding aliases for entire commands, then we wouldn't have, instead of like overriding arguments or something like that, and we decide it's actually not safe to override entire commands, then we'll need to change it to accommodate overriding arguments. And is that going to fit nicely in the plan? And I guess I just don't have a good mental picture of what that looks like. I'll stop talking though. There are two other raised hands.
Yeah. Marley?
So yeah, the KEP actually does specifically say that aliases won't override built-ins. The way that I handled that the way that I handled dealing with it in my PR is that God, I don't remember. Hold on. Oh, that's right. It went into a separate. So there's in the KEP, there's two proposed like fields in the kuberc config file. Where did it go? Yeah, it's aliases and overrides. And so when I did my implementation, I did nothing to check to make sure that aliases weren't overriding built-ins because it was just a simple POC. But I changed it, or sorry, I implemented the delete confirmation using the overrides part. So that basically just looks to see like what command are you running, and then like if there's more commands, like it checks where the delineation between the list of subcommands you're providing and the flags actually start. And so it finds what command or what subcommand you're running, and then applies flags as defined in the kuberc basically. The main thing I didn't figure out how to do, and this is what my question to the group is some flags I think can be defined multiple times, and I don't know how to solve that really, I guess, because what I'm doing is the way that the precedence is set in the execution is it's like, gosh, I forget it. It's like backwards from how I assumed it would be. Like the ones that are at the beginning. No, that's right. The ones that are in the end, the last time that the flag is passed, if it only takes one value, or it can only be defined once, that's the value that gets taken by Cobra. And so the way that I had to do injecting those flags is like, I look for where the split is between the subcommands and the flags, and just like split it into two slices and shove the default flags into it, which are defined in the overrides part of the config. And that way the user provided flags always have precedence over the default ones. But it's like really ugly, right? And it also doesn't solve for that other that problem where a flag can potentially be set multiple times.
Have a look at the alias that I implemented. By the fact that I'm directly injecting or invoking flag parsing from Cobra, I don't have to deal with figuring out how to do that part.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it will work. Like I said, I haven't tried that with multiple flags or flags where you can pass multiple values multiple times. That's probably all those things that will have to be figured out. Maybe it will work, and maybe it won't, and then we will have to revisit that approach. I just did something quick and dirty, and it worked. For sure, because the aliases was something that struck me immediately, and that was a simple thing. The flags, the injection of flags was the part that took me the longest to figure out, because that wasn't something that I explicitly was able to do right away. And I was wondering, because the way Cobra does flag parsing is it always looks at OS args. So it is not easy for you to inject them directly, because you can't override the OS args flag. So you have to inject into the part. You have to be able to hook into the parsing mechanism. I think that kind of worked in my case through that. So yeah, I don't know, probably something that you'll have to double check with what you were saying. Yeah, the flags are the flags in general were the most tricky part of the entire implementation.
Yeah, so I'll be short, and then we should move on to our guest topic, so we don't make them come back. I haven't had a chance to look through either PR yet. I'm so sorry. The idea of, I think your PR looks good, Mache, but I think the way you combine the alias and the overrides things is a foot gun, like Katrina said. So I think it's a good proof of concept for us to move on there, and we can improve on it. I don't ever, y'all are running into the same thing that I ran into when I prototyped this months ago, and it's that Cobra isn't set up for us to do this. And instead of hacking around all of that, like John McBride said that whatever changes we want to get into Cobra, he will most likely approve and get in. So we don't have to do this hacky. We should maybe add hooks to the Cobra command struct that you can add a hook to intercept and like change the flags or something. But think outside the box while y'all are working on that. And yeah, we can talk to John too. John was super on board.
Yes, I at some point in time I was like desperate enough I need to talk to John because I can't figure it out. But then the parsing was there, so probably more testing is required. If the parsing works, then we're good. If not, definitely talking to John, and the sooner the better, because it would be good to get it done in 127 as a simple alpha and let people test it and report.
So I think we should move on to Prasad's topic.
Hello, hi. So yeah, so like I've been working on a very simple tool that basically, like you run a command and then it gives a bunch of log outputs, and you just kind of check whether the command has actually, you have a reference, and you check it against reference. The best way to understand the tool is to probably go to the markdown file, the sample markdown file, right? The idea is like you run a command and you get an output and you check it against a golden reference. The reason this came about was because we wanted to, I think there was there were a couple of requirements where we wanted to check the command line interfaces. So that, if you make a change, you don't break the command line interface. That was one of the original reasons why, came about. So, I'm really hoping to get some feedback from you folks. Is this something that would ever be useful to you? Is it something that we can change to, so that's.
Yeah. So my initial take on it, and when we were talking on Slack, was that I'm not sure if we want to have a very strict output parsing tests. None of the output from kubectl is guaranteed. We left that quite some time ago. We left ourselves quite a little bit of free hand to be able to change the output in some ways. Of course, there are a bunch of tests where we are looking at the output, but just skimming through your examples, the MD examples, I have a couple questions like, how are you planning to deal with the variable elements of the output? Your sample MD, for example, has timeline or some IDs or stuff that will be inevitably changing during the execution. In a similar way, certain parts of the kubectl output will be variable, and I would not want to have very strict output batching, but rather something closer to regex, or something that would tell me, oh, now here's a little bit of change, and then there's the strict part. That's probably the biggest issue that you will have to deal with in the long run, because I'm not sure that strictly matching will work for you too good. And at the same time, figuring out or reinventing regex isn't the way to go, most likely.
Yeah, so currently we, I mean, like we offer, I mean, I basically use regexes to, take out the headers, like because the log headers are going to keep changing. So I use regex to take out the log headers and only look at the output of the log. We have a couple of, regexes for klog and then JSON. I mean, like we could add more. So that's one of the ways we kind of prevent, the parts that mutate. I mean, we only get to compare the stuff we want. So the problem, one of the issues is it's all based on a markdown file, so you can't go and change the golden reference. So I mean, like it's more along the lines of do you want to go and change the reference itself, in the sense that is it possible to identify a specific logic and say, okay, so although the output is variable, it's still compatible. It's still okay to go ahead and mark it as fine. So if I have a couple of examples to work with, maybe I can just reason out what would be the best way to do it. So that would help too.
Okay, so you're basically saying that you are handling the prefixes because the prefixes for the normal logging, let's call it that way, usually have a strict format, whether that be klog, glog, whatever. It is always, oh, it's this, that, and then there's everything else.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that does not apply to kubectl. And oftentimes, since we are looking at stuff like the width of the output terminal and so forth, that data might change between invocations, in that you will have a variable number of spaces, or rather tabs, between certain commands, or depending how long there will be, or yeah, so that's one thing. For you to have a good overview, I'll probably start with the most descriptive commands, such as get, describe. Maybe you could have a look at the wait command, because that output will be also very variable depending on what you're waiting on. And try to have a look at it, whether it does whether it at all makes any sense to have very strict format for kubectl. Because my biggest worry is that with kubectl output, it won't be that easy as with the majority of the loggers, because the loggers are simpler in that regard. Kubectl output is not that simple. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the commands that I was starting with was kubectl cluster info. I'm not sure. I mean, that was one of the things that I thought I would just start with, but I thought we'll see how it goes.
I just pasted into the link into the chat. The unit test for describe command, and there are places where you will see the entire output of the describe command, but that's very often is causing a ton of problems. More often than not, what we're trying to do is match specific parts, whether they match our expectation with regards to numbers and the value.
Thanks. I'll go through that.
Yeah, that's probably that. If I remember correctly, Get also has a bunch of tests with regards to output, but I might be wrong. Yeah, Get has some as well, but I remember that I nerfed a couple of them because in the past that we used to have some problems with this stability of the output. With the Get currently, the stuff is a little bit easier because the Get what we can do is the entire printing is being handled by the server, as in the server tells the kubectl how to print a particular resource. We are only responsible for placing the values in an appropriate table, cells, and rows per whatever the server tells us to do. But yeah, it might be more challenging to deal with those.
Yeah, thanks. I'll work on it. I'll ping in the Slack if I have any other questions. Or
Yeah, anytime if you have any doubts, questions, or anything, let me know. I'm more than happy to have a look at your PR, and we can have a little bit more discussion around it.
Should we reach out to Patrick on this issue about the contract there?
Patrick was already in.
Well, if there's a misconception that kubectl's output is versioned and guaranteed, then we should definitely correct that, because we never make promises around the table output.
When Prasad started a thread earlier this week on the SIG CLI channel, Patrick was already in the thread, and one of my first statements was that we don't have guarantees around the output of kubectl. So yeah, he's aware of that, and I asked if he would be able to join, but I remember Prasad mentioned earlier today that he won't be, but he will show up today to talk about it a little bit more. So based on what I understood, and Prasad could probably prove me wrong, he's working closely with Patrick on it.
Yeah, for him this time is not convenient to join, was what he told me. So I decided to go ahead and have this.
Cool. Should we move on to stand-ups? Brian, you have something in here?
Yeah, I'll keep it quick. I tried to just kind of capture everything that happened since last time. It says I18N survey. I put that the surveys on hold because we decided last time that I would do a KEP. So I did create a pull request for the KEP, outlining what everything I think needs to be done, at least from all the discussions we've had so far, to I guess bring maybe just like not a complete transformation of the improvements. And by what I mean by that is, as I was digging into this, I kind of realized that we talked about, how do we translate things that come from the API, or how do we translate things that come from other things, whether they're plugins or CRDs or other things like that. And while it might be possible, I kind of started thinking that sounds more like a step 2, like step 1 being, hey, let's fix our infrastructure that we have currently, get it working well, and then see how we can extend and build on that. So I'm open to discussion on that, but I put that as a non-goal in the KEP just because we talked about it. And so anybody have any thoughts on that? Or you can chime in on the KEP. We don't have to talk about it now because we only have a couple minutes, but as I was investigating this, I discovered a couple more issues that were affecting kubectl's ability to translate. Even though we had translations, they weren't being output, and I opened some issues on that. So if you're interested, you can take a look at those issues. Yeah, so for example, when you wrap things in the initializing of package level variables, the languages haven't been loaded yet because that the package level variable initialization occurs before main runs. And so when main runs, that's when it loads the languages. So even though it looks like everything's should be working right, when you actually look at the output, those things are not being translated. So just some surprising things like that. Anyway, it's probably, maybe it's related to the KEP or it's part of the KEP, I'm not sure, but I just opened some issues on that and linked them in the KEP as well.
Did you talk to the API machinery folks yet, Brian?
No, I didn't talk to them. You mean about how, like, yeah, I didn't, because I kind of thought, well, this sounds like a second step to this process. I mean, I can ask them or tell them what we're trying to do and see if they have thoughts on ways to communicate, I guess, the language up to the API. I mean, yeah, it's probably worth a conversation.
Awesome.
What I'm trying to do is keep the KEP from kind of becoming too big. I want it to be achievable, but I think it's probably good to explore all the options.
Thank you for working on that. I know you got thrusted upon your lap, so appreciate it.
Yep, no problem. Feel free to comment on the KEP or the KEP PR, I should say, anybody.
Yeah, thanks for taking the initiative on this, Brian.
You're welcome.
Okay, so it looks like we have time now. Is there anything else that we want to quickly address before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just have a quick follow-up for the eviction command we talked about last time, and I found out there is actually a group plugin called evictbot, which does that and has like 50 stars on GitHub. So yeah.
Plugins to the rescue. Cool, thanks, Philip. Is there anything else before we close out here? Well, we appreciate you joining us, and we will see you again in 2 weeks.